Hello, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Manuscript. I'm Cheryl J. Muir of CherylMuir.com, and today I'm really excited that we have with us David Morrell. David, hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're very, very welcome. So a little bit about you. The only difficult thing about you is, in fact, finding out how to introduce you because you have done so much. David is an incredibly accomplished author with over 35 books to his name, including fiction and non-fiction. He's born and raised in Canada, and his career spans over 4 decades. David's debut novel was First Blood, which became the Rambo series of books and movies. And David's latest novel is called Ruler of the Night, which is a Victorian thriller set in 1850s London. So, David, I have so many things I want to talk to you about. I barely know where to start. But one thing that really fascinates me about you is your approach to writing. And you've talked before about this method acting approach where you go very deep with your research. And I would love to hear more about that process.
Well, I was an actor for a time. When in my high school, college days, I had acting lessons, and I thought it would be really great to be an actor. I realized the limitations of my abilities and didn't pursue it. It's a very difficult life. But in preparing for a role, you do all kinds of psychological investigations into why would this person say this and where do they come from, and to try to link it to the sorts of things that I could identify with in my own life. And as I evolved as an author, I realized that I could do the same thing in terms of the subjects that I wrote about. And there's that old bromide that says, write what you know about. Yeah. Well, you can turn that around and say, know what you write about.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a friend of mine introduced me to the expression that he'd heard at an Arkansas Writers Conference in the United States, and I like it a lot. What it does is, we'll put it in a different way. I was once at a distinguished authors panel, and very, very, nice event, and I was going on about my research. And at the other end of the dais here, there were about 4 of us, and way over here, guy says, David, I don't know why you're going on and on about all this research you do. I just make it up. Only he had the, and there was an unnameable word there that we won't go into. And I almost said to him, yeah, it looks like you make it up. And, you can tell when people are getting their information from movies and television. And my favorite example of this is law, programs about the law, where the attorney's in the courtroom and we have the defendant on the stand, right? And the attorney, I don't know what it's like in England, okay, but in the United States, this does not happen, where the attorney would walk over to the witness stand and actually lean against the witness stand and speak this way to face to the person who is giving testimony. The judge would hold the attorney in contempt and put them in jail. You have to stand behind a podium and speak. You can wander a little bit behind it, but you're not going to be able to go over and intimidate the witness that way. And yet in any number, unless someone like John Grisham is writing, who understands this, but in so many movies, television series, and in novels about this subject, you have this nonsense, which if anybody knows the system, immediately calls into question everything. So in whatever subjects we choose to write about, and often I pick a topic that I'm interested in that I don't know about. I did back in the 1990s, I did a novel called Double Image, which was about photography. And I didn't know much about photography, but I had a phobia about photos because I identified them with death. If you think about it, photos freeze time, and they're basically a measurement of how old we're getting and how young in the photos everybody stays. And a lot of the photos we look at are dead people. And I thought, there's a psychological thing here. So if I'm going to do a novel about photography, it would help if I knew something about it. So I took a college course in photography. I became friends with several photographers here in Santa Fe. And in addition, and this was my favorite part of it, I went to a local art gallery that specialized in vintage photos and introduced myself and said, I'm a novelist and I'm doing research. And will you tell me why that photograph is worth $100,000? And thus my education began. And they told me all about the history and what's involved in classic photography as opposed to digital and things like that. And anyway, it was, it's a good example of how I go about doing it. And when you do that, you find ways that people speak on that subject, and you find attitudes. And I mean, it's just a wealth of stuff. And I believe readers grasp that. They say, oh, I didn't know that, or that really feels true. And so and it's such a joy to dive into the research if it's something that you're interested in.
And it makes the story so much richer, don't you think? It has more of a texture to it. Even if the reader doesn't know why consciously, it has a different feeling to it altogether.
Yes, and of course the trick is when to know to hold back, because people, I've got these binders, and I do over here behind me on a table. I have these binders of material that I accumulated for the Victorian novels, and at a certain point, I gave myself, as it were, a PhD in Victorian culture, and I could go on and on and on and on. But the story, our goal as writers is to serve the story. And so what always has to be there is the material is there to convince the reader that this is real. And at a certain point, all right, that's enough, because the story is no longer being served because we're throwing it in just because we know the stuff and we don't want to waste it.
You have a really beautiful way of doing that too, and you've done that in Ruler of the Night. You've blended fact with fiction.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that, because I know it was based on or inspired by Thomas de Quincey.
Thomas de Quincey, in the 1800s, the first person to write about drug addiction, in a famous book of the time, a great title, Confessions of an English Opium Eater. Actually, he drank the stuff. He didn't eat it, but what the heck.
Eater sounds better than drinker on the cover, I guess.
Great, Confessions of an English opium drinker just doesn't do the job, right?
Opium eater.
But he had all these nightmares because of the opium, and it was laudanum, the form of brandy and powdered opium, which was legal, cheap, and available everywhere, the only efficient painkiller they had. So, but they knew you could get addicted to it, and there was a skull and crossbones on the bottle. But he got really hooked. He had, if a tablespoon would kill you, he drank, it's unbelievable, 16 ounces of this stuff a day. It's hard to imagine. And he's maybe the only author, well, we could go for Coleridge too, because Coleridge was a massive opium addict as well. But very few writers have ever, with the habit, so to speak, ever written brilliant stuff. And De Quincey was absolutely brilliant. One of the things that made him brilliant was that he had these epic nightmares because of the opium that he was ingesting, in which he said all of civilization tromped through his mind every night, and the epic thing. And he'd wake up and say, where do these nightmares come from? And constructed a theory 80 years before Freud that the human mind was filled with chasms and sunless abysses, layer upon layer, in which there are secret chambers where alien natures can hide undetected. And I thought, I'm in love. I can really work with this guy. He's so far ahead with Freud. So in the Victorian era, I would be able to match him with Scotland Yard, which was newly invented. And they thought it was cool to have plaster casts of footprints, right? Oh boy, state of the art. And talking to them about the chasms and sunless abysses of the human mind. And in addition, he was a fan of mass murderers. He'd written a very famous series of essays on murder, considered as one of the fine arts, in which in the third one, he had invented the true crime genre by recreating the first media sensation mass murders in English history, the Ratcliffe Highway murders of 1811. So I just thought, this is just too good in the process, I time travel. I was reading, I'm learning about De Quincey, reading the biographies and reading all his stuff. And I got so I could quote from him as I just did to you. I mean, and a lot of the dialogue in the novels is actually him from his work. And then I got to know about 1850s London, and then I have to know about the Victorian era. And to my right over here, I have shelves and shelves and shelves of books about the period. And I don't want to forget, this is my prize if we can get back further.
Oh gosh.
This is 1851 London.
Oh, I have to get myself one of those.
Well, you can when you're going to London in a little bit, right?
I am.
So go to the Museum of London, and you can obtain this. It's a map of 1851 that was prepared for the so-called Crystal Palace exhibition, the first World's Fair, which established the Victorian era for what it was and the dominance of England in the world. And anyhow, I can get around on this thing about as well as people who live in London can get around. And it's different. There's the streets here that are that no longer exist, and there are streets, vice versa. Yeah. And I have a little magnifying glass because the streets are, but it's so cool. And down here,
really neat.
Here are all the spots up here. If I don't know if should I get a little closer?
Yeah, just along the top there. Yeah,
you can see on the top.
Yeah,
and on down the sides are all the tourist locations that people come. 7 million people came to London in the summer of 1851 for the so-called Crystal Palace exhibition, which was
a phenomenal amount of people for that time.
It was enormous, and society changed, and so they get these maps, and then they knew where to go to all the important places, and I mean it's utterly amazing. So this is the kind of thing you get a good look at it. So I put it down, all right. So this is the kind of thing that I was doing that would make me feel that I was there. And then the trick was how to make people, readers, also feel they were there. And so I had all these, my favorite example is we'll talk about this, but in a large crowd, it's great at a book signing. I say, how much did a woman's clothes weigh in 1854 London?
Because they had the skirts and everything.
Yes, right? Exactly, and it's a trick question in a way because the hoops became into fashion because of the 1851 event, the Crystal Palace event. So people will say 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, and I'm going, come on now, let's be real, 25, 30, the answer is 37 pounds. The hoops were made of metal or else whale's teeth, and they were big. They, in fact, in Ruler of the Night, I mentioned that the hoop dresses got so wide they had to alter the railings on staircases and make them project out farther, lean out this way, up away from the steps in order to accommodate the dresses. And now we have 10 yards of ruffled satin that goes over the hoop. We have the tendency for it to pop up. So for modesty, we have many undergarments.
Yeah, and they had the long kind of pantaloons and all of that,
exactly. Right? Yes. And then they put weights in the skirts to keep them from bouncing up. Right. So when you're all done, it's 37 pounds. And if you add that to the corset, they were fainting. These poor gals were fainting all over the place. But what a fascinating way to look at the period. If we read Victorian, one of the fun things about doing the books, which I might as well give the titles: Murder is a Fine Art, Inspector of the Dead, and then Ruler of the Night, the newest, and the last one. It's a trilogy. But if we read Victorian literature, they knew all this stuff. They knew what the streets were made of. They knew the coins, the gold, silver, and copper coins that were in their pockets. They didn't need to talk about all that. And so a modern person reading, let us say, Dickens, brilliant as he is, often feels there's a kind of flatness that because Dickens didn't need to explain all the odds. For example, a surgeon in Victorian England was considered the low part of the medical ladder, whereas we think surgeons are the top.
Right.
Why were surgeons not held in repute? Because they touched their patients, and a physician did not. A physician sat behind the desk, and moreover, the surgeon got paid directly from the client, whereas the physician said, here's some medicine, take this down to the apothecary. They would go down to the apothecary, get the drugs, pay the apothecary, and then the apothecary would then pay the physician. So no money directly passed between the client. So physicians weren't in trade. And as a consequence, a physician could be presented to the Queen, but a surgeon could not.
And so consequently, Dickens wouldn't need to explain that because it just was. It just is.
Exactly.
It's like us trying to explain the internet or cell phones. It's just so part of our life and our existence that we wouldn't have to explain it. Whereas if it's us writing about then, we would be inclined to explain all these little nuances and details.
Exactly. And so what I did, once I realized this, that I couldn't take anything for granted, like locks. Somebody locks the door. And I'm imagining a modern lock, but I thought, wait a minute. So I had to go back and find out all about locks from the period, which were quite different, and many of them didn't have doorknobs as we understand them. The key became actually what you used to open and close the door and then lock it. And I mean, it was just so cool. And so what I wound up doing in these books, I thought of them as imitation Victorian novels. And what I was putting in them was those little secret things that they knew, but we do not, unless you're crazy enough like me to spend years and years doing the research. And so I would put those details in the books, and people would say, I didn't know that. And once somebody says that, I've got them.
Yeah.
And so that was the whole point. And every once in a while, I'll stop the books and have this kind of contradicts what I said a little while ago, but every once in a while I'll stop the books and have a little essay. In Murder is a Fine Art, the narrator in effect says, well, let's pause a moment, because what's going to happen now, if you don't know about Victorian burial practices, you're not going to understand this scene. So then we get 2 paragraphs about Victorian burial practices, and then the scene goes on. And I don't know, somehow it works. It shouldn't, but somehow it works because the information's so interesting.
And so how do you approach dialogue from that era? You said you used some of Thomas Quincy's actual dialogue, but obviously they spoke very differently to how we do today. How did you approach that?
A lot of it was by reading a ton of Victorian novels. And my favorite of the group, you're supposed to say Dickens, and I love Trollope. Trollope is great. But my favorite is a Victorian, what they called sensation novelist, which is another word for a thriller writer. And her name was Mary Elizabeth Braddon. And Mary Elizabeth Braddon, the whole modern thriller thing started in 1859. Wilkie Collins starts to publish in serial format, The Woman in White. And then and that went over in 1860. In 61, another thriller writer, Mrs. Henry Wood, published something called East Lynne. It's an awful novel, but it's got a lot of sensation in it. And then the prize in '62, Mary Elizabeth Braddon publishes Lady Audley's Secret, AUDLEY'', and it is so good, and it's so modern. And reading her, she became my model for the dialogue. Because reading her, I realized, and she's just a little later, I'm 1854, 1855, Lady Audley's 1862, it's close enough. Yeah. But reading her, I realized that a lot of the stodginess that we identify with Victorian dialogue doesn't apply. And I had these books I kept when I was reading, especially Mary Elizabeth Braddon, but Trollope too, and Dickens. If I saw a slang phrase that I wasn't familiar with, but that was really cool, like the term for a streetwalker, Scotland Yard sometimes called them a dolly mop. And, so I just put in a dolly mop, and I wouldn't explain necessarily what it was, but in context, you'd know what they were talking about. And anyhow, the frankness of the dialogue in Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and there's one scene where she actually, the character wants a guy to do something for her, and she actually sidles up to him and starts to kiss him.
Which at the time is completely scandalous.
You don't think that was possible because they didn't write about it, even though, how different was it from today? Who knows? But I thought, all right, you can be kind of frank. And so anyway, the dialogue, I had these lists of really interesting slang terms. And so when I wanted somebody to express confusion, I just go to my confusion list and I put one in from there. And, with one device and another, it felt good. One of the things I had to do was I thought I was pretty good about hiding the Canadian American part of me. But I mean, I got caught out. I used the word in the first novel, cookie instead of biscuit. And horrors. So we then had several very sophisticated readers in England who would go through all the manuscripts and look for, and I'd say railroad when really I meant railway.
Right. Things
like that. And I think by now on the third one, the final one, Ruler of the Night, I don't think people are going to find many, it's pretty authentic.
That's so funny because I'm here in Vancouver in Canada. I'm an English girl and my book's going to be published in many different places, including the States. So do you use Canadian English or US English? I can relate to that.
Well, and of course, there's a charm in a tone from somebody from another culture. I'm very fond of Tana French, for example, a British author, and her I'm not reading Americanized British novel. I'm reading, the real British novel, and it just feels authentic. So I feel at a certain point we just go ahead in the modern era and do what we are. But back then, there's no way I can use cookie instead of biscuit. I mean, I heard about that one.
Oh, geez. So I do want to talk about Rambo, but before that, just for my own personal satisfaction, I noticed in my research of you that you were involved in writing comic books.
I was, yes. In 2007, Marvel Comics contacted me to write a 6-part Captain America comic book series, and their motive was that the creator of Rambo, an American military icon, would be a logical writer to work with Captain America, another military icon. And I always try to go to the heart of the story, the central principle. And in this case, I thought Captain America, here's a guy who's been a superhero named after the United States since 1942. How would that feel? What about the burden of being named after the United States in all those decades and all the controversies and all. So that was my goal, to get to the heart of what Captain America was in terms of his name. Yeah. And then I was asked to do a Spider-Man. I did a 2-part Spider-Man, and then I did a Wolverine. So I've got the trifecta, you know. Yeah. So I did the 3 of them.
That's very cool. So Rambo, I can't wait to talk about this. So from publishing First Blood all the way through to the first movie, am I correct in saying it was about a 10-year time span? So it was
10 years, exactly.
Fairly long period of time. So you had time to obviously, you know, develop all that knowledge and get used to the idea mentally and emotionally of your story being told on screen. But let me ask you this, I'm really curious. When you were first writing First Blood, did you have any feeling, any kind of gut feeling or intuition about what it was about to become?
I did not. And any writer who, you know, if you go back, the way this is sometimes put, someone said to me, you know, if you think about it, you've got Sherlock Holmes, you've got Tarzan, you've got James Bond, you've got Rambo, and you've got Harry Potter. Wow. As the big 5 in the 20th century, movies from novels that became, you know, international icons. Mm-hmm. Who could have predicted that? It's impossible. Hemingway talks about discipline, talent, and luck, and the luck part cannot be discounted. What I did know was that I was writing a book. It took me years. It's my late 20s. I think it was published when I was 29. And I was writing a book that I hoped would revolutionize the way action was written. I was at Penn State at the time studying Hemingway. I traveled there from Canada to study with a professor named Philip Young, a noted Hemingway scholar. And I did my master's thesis on Hemingway's style. And I was struck by, he was an action writer in many cases, you know, to have and have not the gangsters in Key West and in Cuba, and, you know, the war in For Whom the Bell Tolls and in A Farewell to Arms, and there are other action sequences in his work. And I'm reading him and I'm thinking, you know, he's writing action so fresh, in such a fresh way. It's as if no one had written about action before. And I got to think about all the pulp expressions, like a shot rang out, and it just drives me nuts when I read that, or gun smoke filled the air, or please. You know, I get, and I thought, can I write an action book that doesn't feel like a genre book? And that was the goal, and it's been sort of my goal throughout my career. When I was writing The Brotherhood of the Rose and the other espionage novels in that series, I was trying to write a spy novel that didn't feel like a spy novel. Yeah. You know, and I wish more genre writers would have that ambition to transcend in order to, you know, bring a greater solidity to what they're doing. So anyway, I knew that for better or worse, I was writing action differently. This sounds odd the way I'm saying it. I'm like I'm worshiping myself, but I just knew it was different. Yeah. And Time magazine, the book was reviewed everywhere. It was astonishing for a first novel. And all of them were complimentary except for Time magazine, who said, who condemned me for having invented a new low form of fiction called carnography, which was the equivalent of pornography, only violence. It's the meat novel, they called it. Huh. And one of my thriller inspirations is a British thriller author named Geoffrey Household, who wrote a famous book called Rogue Male in 1939 about a British big game hunter who stalks Hitler just before the Second World War. It's so brilliant. He gets caught on the first page. Can you imagine? The whole setup, he gets caught on the first page. He takes all that for granted. Anyhow, it's a fairly violent book, but it's got that British veneer to it. Taste. Yeah. So What'd you say?
It's tastefully violent.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we need violence that's tasteful. Yeah. So I sent Household. He and I corresponded. I sent him a note about, oh, I just love your work, and we had a kind of a exchange of letters, and so I sent him the manuscript for First Blood, the first Rambo book. And I thought, would you be kind enough to give me a quote for this? And he wrote back and he said, good heavens, no, I can't possibly give you a quote for this book. It's far too bloody. And I thought the title, First Blood, might have been a clue, right? So I knew then that we were in a different approach, a different attitude. And I think the novel still has that reputation that it changed things. But in terms of the movies, there were 10 years, it went through 26 scripts, it went through 5 studios. My big regret, I think Sylvester did a great job with the role. He's got the eyes. Eyes are what movie acting is about. And Ted Kotcheff, a fine director, with apologies. In 1975, Sidney Pollack, one of my favorite directors, and Steve McQueen were going to make First Blood. And Steve was going to be Rambo and do the motorcycle and all that. But what happened was, as they were about to start shooting, they'd been in development for 3-4 months. Sidney told me this story, and he said, we suddenly realized that Steve was 45 years old. And in 1975, Vietnam was a young person's war. And there were no 45-year-old Vietnam veterans. So they had to, the whole thing fell apart. And I thought, well, that's too bad. With apologies, because Sly did a great job, I thought.
Right. Yeah, and at the time he was only known for Rocky, of course, which had its own journey through to being. And
it's true. He said that he thought First Blood was the most important picture of his career because it changed. It showed that he could do something besides Rocky.
Yeah. So readers often talk about, and joke around about the book versus the movie.
Yeah.
And as writers, when we sell the rights, we often lose creative control. So what's your take on that whole argument?
When you sell a book, I'll put it a different way. My agent at the time said, okay, we have the movie thing. That was in 1972. And as you said, it took 10 years, a lot of incarnations. And he said, I think you should get an attorney to look at the contract. And now I was an assistant professor at the University of Iowa, earning $10,500 a year. And my advance on First Blood was $3,500. How things changed. And the attorney said, I'm going to have to charge you $500. And I'm thinking, $500? I mean, that's a lot of money. So I said, all right. So he went off, and he came back and he said, David, I've got some good stuff in here for you. First of all, you're going to get, if there are sequels or remakes to the movie, you're going to get money as if it was being purchased the first time. And I said, his name was Milt. I said, Milt Amgott was his name, nice man. I said, Milt, everybody's dead at the end of First Blood. How are there going to be sequels? And he said, David, you don't understand the film business. If this goes to the screen, it could turn out to be a musical comedy on a submarine. And that's, you just have to say, all right, if you don't want it to be changed, don't sell the movie rights. And there are many cases where books have been ruined. But on other occasions, books have been improved. The Godfather is a fine read, but the movie is so beyond, so it could go both ways. And it's an act of faith. And as an author, occasionally it is true that an author gets to adapt the work. Rarely. And most of the time, you just have to figure that, they're courting you when they want the book, but once you sign and they pay you, they may never speak to you again. They may not remember your name again. And that's just the nature of the business. Now, it worked well for me, but it could have gone in another direction. And there is, the movie and the book are different. The plot is the same, but the interpretation is different, and the ending is different. A major ending difference. And about 10 years ago, I was shocked. The company called me and said, "We're doing a special DVD release of First Blood, and would you come to California and do a full-length audio commentary for the film, for the DVD, comparing the novel and the film?" And I thought, this is, of course I did it, but I was stunned because who invites the author to talk about a movie based on the book? It doesn't happen. So on balance, I got treated pretty well.
So what's next for you after Ruler of the Night? It's a trilogy, so that's put to bed. What's next?
Yeah, from the start, I knew this was a trilogy. I knew that it would be about De Quincey coming to London for a reason, and in the third book, the mystery, it's a real life mystery for him. In real life, there was a woman named Anne who was a streetwalker, a dolly mom. And she was 15 and he was 17, and she had saved his life. He'd collapsed on the street and he'd fallen in love with her. They were boon companions. They used to stand on Oxford Street and listen to the organ grinder, and that was they were starving, and that was their entertainment. And and then one day she vanished. And so in the first book, Murder is a Fine Art, he has come to London because someone has told him he knows what happened to Anne. And then in the middle book, Inspector the Dead, there's some references to her. These are independent stories, but in the third one, he finds out what happened to her. And, so having understood that, it all was tied together in a way that I found very satisfying. And I loved these characters. De Quincey had a daughter named Emily, who was 21 and it was just amazing. And he was 69 at the time, and she was kind of, he's a drug addict. She was kind of his caretaker. These two people, I just feel as if I know them. And there's a certain point where I said, well, I could do a fourth one, and maybe in the future I will. But I thought, wearing out one's welcome, doing one too many, say, oh, I wish you'd stop back here. And I knew that this was well-rounded. So that's why I said, not outwear the welcome, do, serve these characters. So here's what happened. From since 2009 to the last 7 years, almost every book I read was about 1850s London, back to our method acting style. I mean, a couple of years ago, I started reading modern books again, but truly, that's what I did. And, that map I showed you earlier, I was there. In my mind, I was there. And I'm freaking out now because I feel like I was in a bathysphere, and it was so wonderful to be encased in 1850s London. It was so fascinating. And now, so now I've risen to the surface, and it's very weird, really, really weird. So I'm, as they say, between engagements in show business. I'm trying to think of something that would be an attention getter. You want to write something, say, oh yeah, that's great. I'm so glad you're doing that. So I'm reading a lot of modern novels now to see I don't understand the market quite, to tell you the truth, because at this point, every novel seems to have the girl in the title. So I'm just adjusting, let us say, to the modern world.
That must have been so fascinating. I just have this image of you kind of being so immersed in 1850s London and kind of poking your head out at 2016 and thinking, how the hell did we get here?
How the hell did I get here? And at the moment, it's over now, but the U.S. election,
Oh gosh.
So I'm, in some ways I want to go back to, but it's done. That door is closed, Good. Well, we'll see. I've been doing some. I did a essay about the 50th anniversary of Ira Levin's Rosemary's Baby. For next year, there's going to be an anniversary, half anniversary book, and they asked me if I'd do that. So I've been writing some essays, and I did some stories. I did a story about Sherlock Holmes and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle for a new anthology called Echoes of Sherlock Holmes, and it's called The Spiritualist, and it's about why Conan Doyle was obsessed about spiritualism and the afterlife. So I was able to. It was fun. It's sort of Victorian. It was kind of like half in my bathysphere rising to the surface. Yeah.
Oh, I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to wrap up now.
It's fun.
Oh, it has been amazing. Tell everyone, we're going to have the details for Ruler of the Night below, where everyone can find that and purchase the book and the trilogy. But tell everyone where they can find you online.
Yes, I have. It's David Morrell, Morrell, David Morrell, all one word, .net. Yeah, someone else has the com. I don't, so I'm the net, but it's like the network of readers. So it feels good. And it's a very informative, fun site. There's a lot of stuff on it, a lot of free stuff. Like on the writing page, there are several free downloadable essays about writing, including the first chapter of my writing book, The Successful Novelist. And on the I have pages for Murders of Fine Art, Inspector of the Dead, and Ruler of the Night. And on the latter two, I've been writing photo essays about the weird, in many cases, weird Victorian locations that I used in the novels. And so if people go there, davidmorrell.net, to the books page, and then down to the pages for these books, and I can't resist. I've got it, such a beautiful cover with
it's gorgeous.
It's about this one's about the first murder on an English railway. And railways in those days in London, in England, they didn't have corridors like we do. They were separate compartments that held 8 people, 4 and 4 facing each other, and the doors were locked when the train left the station, and the windows were barred for safety purposes so people wouldn't stick their neck out. And in one case, one guy got in, a banker, another guy got in, just 2 people locked the door, a train pulled out. The first guy pulled out a knife and went to work, and no matter how much you screamed, no one could help you. So, it was just, so anyway, it's about the railway, and I have Euston Station in London, which is a major set in Ruler of the Night. Didn't look then like it does now. It looked like in the United States Grand Central Station. It was gorgeous, and it had the world's largest arch for carriages to go under in order to get to the train station. So these photo essays are, and I have a photo essay about the Crystal Palace, which was so tall that full-grown elm trees were dwarfed inside it. It was like a greenhouse, and 200 musicians could barely be heard. And so anyway, if people will go to those pages, they'll see these recreations of what these wonderful places look like, and there are by links there, and all the stuff that a website's supposed to do.
Excellent, and we'll make sure it's linked down below as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I absolutely love talking to you.
It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.